Hi everybody, it's May and I'm back this week to answer your questions about my Kickstarter campaign, Queer Horror Novel, An Experiment in Community. I think I'm the person to tell this story because I grew up queer in the South, and a lot of pieces of the book are going to be semi-autobiographical, combining stories that I've heard from my grandmother, from my mother, from my sister, and kind of taking this narrative of what it's like to be a woman in the South and combining it with what it's like to be queer in the South and how certain beliefs travel through generations and the impact that they can have as the world changes. So this isn't really my first long project in the grand scheme of things. The Book of Queer Saints, from the time that I had the idea to the time that I had sent the books out to Kickstarter backers, that was about a 10-month period where I was working really hard, getting stories, editing, putting the book together, designing, all of that stuff. So in that sense, it's not my first long project, but it is my first long writing project. So yeah, I imagine that it's going to be different in some ways, and in some ways it's going to be the same. The thing that kept me really motivated when I was working on Queer Saints was that it was a good idea and that people were really passionate about it, and I felt that that passion was proof that these stories really needed to be told and this project really needed to be made. So anytime I was feeling discouraged or like I wouldn't be able to finish what I started, I would just remind myself, hey, what I'm doing here is really important. It's important for a lot of different people, and it's important for a lot of different reasons. And I think that everything that I set out to do with Queer Saints, I succeeded in. So in that sense, I think that making Queer Saints was a really good primer on working on this next long project, which is a much more personal project for me. I actually had to think about this question a lot because, yeah, it was hard for me to kind of conceptualize a book and what the comparisons to TV and television would be. Even as a screenwriter, that was difficult for me, but I put a lot of thought into it, and I think that this book, as so far, is most like Legion, Noah Hawley's Legion, starring Dan Stevens, Hamish Linklater, and Mysterious Skin, starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Brady Corbett. That's more of a, well, they're both kind of obscure underground-ish, you know, even though Legion aired on FX and it's part of Marvel, it's not really part of Marvel. It's like Marvel's bastard child. And Mysterious Skin is kind of this understated underground gem about how our minds reconcile the traumas that we've been through in our world. Like, how do we move about our world? How do we justify what has happened to us? And Legion is about, I mean, essentially it's about possession and a haunting, if you really think about it. So I think in that sense, it's most like those two. So I don't really have a specific writing routine where I get up at this time and I write for this many hours. I wish that I could be like that, but I just can't produce that way. So usually I just go by, you know, what is due when, prioritize the things that are due sooner and push off the things that are due later. And I just work toward that goal in my own time. And that's what works for me. So if there's a day that I don't write, it's not that big of a deal because I can always catch up on the next day. And that works for me as a disabled person because I'm not always feeling up to even getting out of bed, you know, especially on days that I have chemotherapy. That's one really common treatment for lupus is like oral chemotherapy. So on days like that, a lot of the time I can't write or I can't focus. So yeah, it works best for me to just have a deadline at, you know, 2 weeks from now, and then make sure that I get the things done I want done then. Really loosey-goosey. I can't believe I just said loosey-goosey. So I've had this project in my mind for a couple of years now. I don't know exactly what year it was that Gabino Iglesias had put out a call for holiday Hallmark stories. But this started as a story for that call, and as I was writing it, I started to realize that I could do more with it. And instead of submitting, I held it back. So I have been kind of thinking about it ever since that call, writing bits and pieces down, writing outlines down, taking notes in my phone, and just knowing that it was going to become a book, and one that is really important to me. And the longer that I've waited, like I'm really glad that I waited, because the longer that I waited, the more personal and the more important it feels. Thank you for joining my Q&A today. I'll do another one next Friday, so if you have any questions for me, please drop them in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Thank you. I love you. You're important, you're special, you're loved.